What did I expect? For as long as I can remember, I've never really been a fan of the Happy Madison production company. Growing up, their films were some of the most popular comedies among my year levels at school, and though I think a few of their movies are fine, it's basically common knowledge that the majority of their products are utter crap. And as a result, I never really paid any attention to them, and the last film I even watched of theirs was 2015's Pixels, which to this day is the last Happy Madison film to be given a theatrical release. Why? Well, it's because during that same year, they signed a deal with Netflix, and from then on, every one of their films had been distributed as a Netflix original. Now, until this day, I never watched any, mainly because I didn't want to waste my time watching a film that I kind of knew wasn't gonna be that great. But for some reason that I can't understand why, I decided to watch a Netflix Happy Madison production. And as I said before, what did I expect? To be fair, The Wrong Missy is not one of the worst comedies I've seen in my life, but I will say it is one of the blandest. Basically nothing about this movie is interesting, or compelling, or even funny. It's just a predictable Happy Madison circle jerk where everyone gets paid at the end of the day and no one really cares. So without further ado, let's jump in. So the big standout performance this time around is Lauren Lapkus's Missy, but since this is a Happy Madison production, standout performance translates to being the worst part of the movie. My familiarity with Lapkus is practically non-existent. I really only know her from her small bit roles in 2015's Jurassic World and 2014's Blended, which is another incredibly bland Happy Madison production. But unlike those roles, she's been bumped up to the lead, which makes this the big catalyst for her future career. And exposure-wise, it succeeded. In the first 4 weeks of its release, the film was viewed 59 million times, making it one of Netflix's most streamed original movies. So she would have benefited heavily from this. Too bad she was fucking terrible. Now, I had heard some stuff about her character beforehand, but not even that could prepare me for how bad she was gonna be. Missy is a quirky, loud, socially awkward protagonist who I can only describe as a psychotic maniac with not a hint of likability. I mean, there are 2 instances in this movie where she rapes an unconscious David Spade, and no, it doesn't add anything to the narrative. But if that doesn't scream quirky, I don't know what does. Ha ha ha, we're Happy Madison. Non-consenting sex jokes are funny. But that's not the only thing that makes this character unbelievably terrible. Lapkus's performance is horrifically unfunny and incredibly annoying. Instead of giving Missy any kind of interesting traits or a likable personality, she instead does the bare minimum and just regurgitates unfunny joke after unfunny joke to the point where you want to drill a hole through your head. But since this is a Happy Madison production, it doesn't matter how unlikable she is. The script still needs to include that sappy, forced, sentimental backstory, even if it doesn't match the consistency of what we as an audience has been experiencing. And her relationship with Spade throughout the film makes absolutely no sense. I didn't believe for a second that these two had developed any kind of chemistry that would attract them to each other. She basically makes Spade's life a living hell, and he only comes around to her when he benefits from her antics, like how she hypnotizes his boss into making Spade his favorite employee. It just feels like he starts to like her because she gets him higher in the company, instead of what is supposed to be happening, which is them developing an organic relationship, making the second act breakup at the end seemed, and you guessed it, forced. But overall, she's just a terrible character, and honestly, I don't think anyone could have pulled it off. So I'm not putting the entire blame on Lapkus, but I'm honestly expecting some Razzies in a couple months. David Spade looked bored out of his mind. He brings nothing of note to the table except for making me smirk a few times, which I'll get into later. But besides that, he was so bland and forgettable that honestly, I can't even write about him, which isn't good, as even though Missy is the standout, he is the main protagonist. Nick Swasden looked like he'd been having way too many complimentary drinks at the hotel bar. Every time he was on screen, he looked exhausted and half awake, and to add insult to injury, his voice sounded raspy and just plain terrible.
So it's good news, more bad news. Your ex-fiance is going to be at the retreat. My office books the travel, so Julia's going to be with Rich.
It's like he yelled at the top of his lungs for over an hour before the camera started rolling. But I don't really have a lot to say about him, so yeah, in short, it's just a very bad performance. And like him, everyone else is just as bland and uninteresting, from Adam Sandler's wife to Adam Sandler's nephew, and like most Happy Madison productions, there's Rob Schneider.
Oh my God.
Enough said, but at least he's not playing a Hawaiian. Speaking of Hawaii, that's where the film takes place, and if that's not Happy Madison enough for you, they of course set it at a fucking Four Seasons resort. So not only did they make a shitty movie, but in between filming, everyone got a free vacation. And this mentality really shows in every aspect of the film. Laid back and not giving a shit, especially in relation to the production. Theo Van Der Sander's cinematography exudes no style or personality. It's actually so flat and forgettable that I was certain that either a robot was behind the camera, or it was some guy's first credit as a cinematographer. But no, it's just a guy who has over 50 years of experience with a few notable projects under his belt who decided to take an elongated nap during the entire production. Which really sucks because with all the wild antics Missy gets into, they could have utilized a visual style that fit with the chaotic side of her character, and in turn could have resulted in the humor being way better just by being more creative with the camera. But fuck it, we're Happy Madison, we don't care. Look, here's a montage of her doing quirky shit. You want personality? Let's slow down the footage like a shitty rap video. That's as far as our creativity goes. Now, let's prioritize a completely pointless scene where we can give Adam Sandler's daughter a cameo, because that is more important. But back to the visuals. The cinematography isn't the only bad aspect. The effects suck as well. What a shocker. There's this whole scene that takes place in a shark cage, and like you would expect from literally any modern shark film, the shark looks like shit. And another effect they do is the whole texting thing where they show the text behind and beside the characters, and I'm okay with the effect if it's used in a creative way, but with this it's really poorly implemented as it constantly changes size in between cuts with no consistency. And on the subject of effects, even the practical ones looked terrible. Here's an example. Rob Schneider's character lost his fingers to a shark, and just look at it.
This to me, you tell him from me. What's up?
I can practically see his fingers underneath the makeup because of how much skin there is. And also, I can't confirm this, but this cliff edge looks like a wooden platform. It just seems way too smooth. The music is non-existent. I don't remember hearing one instrumental as the whole soundtrack is made up of pre-existing pop songs. And I mean, that isn't bad. Hell, the guy that put together the soundtrack is Matteo Messina, who, if you don't know, worked on the soundtrack to 2007's Juno. But the problem is, every song used in this film was incredibly forgettable, with the exception of one. The only memorable song in this whole soundtrack was a pop reggae rendition of Owie Jive's My Neck, My Back. And to be completely honest, it slaps. I was wondering if this was actually written for the film, but no, it came out 5 years prior, and even more surprising, it's by Ella King, who is Rob Schneider's daughter, so at least there's some talent in the family. Speaking of talent, let's just get to the comedy already. So yeah, if you haven't caught on yet, the film is insanely unfunny. I'll actually go ahead and say it's possibly the most unfunny Happy Madison production I've seen, meaning I found Jack and Jill to be a more pleasant experience, because at least we got Dunkaccino out of that. Now, I'm no comedy expert, but I know funny when I see it, and 98% of this film is not funny. Either it's wildly predictable, the jokes don't make sense, it's gross for the sake of being gross, and as I said before, Lupkus's performance, who is the main comic relief for the film, is terrible. But I'd be lying if I didn't smirk once or twice. Not at Lupkus, of course, that's impossible, but more at David Spade. I'm not saying he was good, but there were a few fast-paced pieces of dialogue that got a small reaction out of me. And if they were included in a better film, they could have had a better impression. But since the majority of this film is so painful to sit through, for the time being, these small jolts once in a while at least kept me from hanging myself with my mic cord. Now, before we end this, there's one part of this film that I noticed that makes me believe this entire production was made to be purposefully bad. Now, remember that shark scene? Well, the context is that Spade and his new CEO are in that cage and they are trying to get the attention of the people on the boat, but they of course don't notice them. But in one of the shots where they cut to the people on the boat, there's this small dialogue exchange between Rob Schneider and another man.
I don't know. I liked Free Willy, dude. I thought it was gonna be. I can see why you wouldn't.
Well, I didn't think the whale was likable. You got a good likable whale. I mean, otherwise, if the whale's an asshole, who's gonna care?
It's my belief that this line was included as a self-aware jab at the Missy character, thereby making me think Happy Madison was trolling their audience by making a purposefully bad product. But hey, That's just a theory. A Happy Madison theory. Fuck this. Let's just get over with. So, to end this off, The Wrong Missy is a bland, unfunny, poorly acted chore of a movie that I would not recommend unless you're either 12 years old or a crazy person. Surprisingly enough, it's not the worst film I've seen this year, but it definitely makes the top 5. I have no intentions of watching it ever again, so with that said, fuck this movie.